My name is Lila Morgan, and I'm 27 years old. At my brother's award ceremony, my father raised a glass before a room of Maine's non-profit leaders and declared, "James is the future of coastal conservation." Then he turned to me, his voice sharp. "Lila, though, she's just a data cruncher, a cog in the wheel." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but they didn't know this cog would soon hold the deed to the very legacy they stood on.
That crisp October evening in Portland, Maine, I felt like a ghost in my own life.
The event was held in the grand ballroom of the Portland Regency Hotel, a place steeped in the scent of sea salt and polished mahogany, its high ceilings adorned with chandeliers that cast golden light across the room. The hardwood floors gleamed, reflecting the glow like a calm harbor at dusk. The ballroom buzzed with tailored suits and elegant dresses, a sea of environmentalists, philanthropists, and local officials, their voices humming with talk of policy and progress. I stood out in my simple charcoal dress, chosen to fade into the background of this polished crowd. I felt like an intruder, clutching a glass of sparkling water, my fingers cold against the crystal. My mother, Dr. Sylvia Morgan, a marine biologist with a smile as precise as her lab notes, glided past with a nod so brief it felt like a formality. Her focus was already on a foundation chair, her handshake warm but calculated. Across the room, my brother James shone like a lighthouse, newly honored for his work on lobster fishery restoration. His smile was effortless, magnetic, drawing every eye. I was a shadow, a name barely whispered, an uninvited guest at my family's triumph. My father, Dr. Edward Morgan, stepped to the podium, his voice resonant, like he was addressing a conference, not his family. He lauded James as the embodiment of the Morgan legacy, a visionary for Maine's coast. His words were sharp, eloquent, but cold, as if rehearsed for an audience, not felt. As applause faded, Ms. Eleanor Holt, a retired conservationist and family friend, smiled warmly.
Brilliant young man, Edward.
"But what about your daughter? I hear she's in data analysis." The room's gaze shifted to me, a collective pause. My father's smile was icy, his eyes pinning me like a specimen. "Lila," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "keeps the spreadsheets tidy at a non-profit. A cog in the wheel, really." The words landed like a quiet blade, followed by awkward chuckles and averted eyes. No one spoke up. My mother's face flickered with irritation. Not for me, but for my father's lapse in decorum before such a crowd. That moment shattered the last fragile hope I didn't know I held. I wasn't just lesser, I was an inconvenience to their perfect narrative, a smudge on their polished image. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury I'd shed years ago. My spine, trained by years of solving data crises under pressure, stayed straight. I set my glass down with a soft clink on a nearby table. I turned and walked toward the ballroom's heavy oak doors, my steps steady, head high. I didn't run or look back, leaving behind the murmurs, the clinking glasses, and the hollow life I'd once thought was mine. Outside, Portland's chilly air hit me, sharp with the scent of pine and ocean. In my mind, I saw a glass cracking silently, crumbling into fine dust. My old sedan's engine hummed as I drove away, Casco Bay's dark waters glinting in my rearview mirror, a quiet divide. The term cog wasn't new, it was just the first time my father had said it publicly.
Memories flooded es I drove trug Portlands Kvietstreets, Maples Blatzing red under Streetlights.
They weren't warm, they were a map of every slight, every dismissal etched into me. My destination loomed, our family's 3-story Victorian house in Kennebunkport, 30 miles south, its grey shingles pristine, the lawn manicured like a painting. Inside, it was sterile, a showcase for success, not a home. I could see the dining room's walnut table, polished to a mirror, my father at its head, debating marine policy with James while I sat silent. At 14, I'd shared my excitement about building a database for my school's environmental club, cutting report times by 15%. "Dad," I'd said, beaming. He'd given a distracted nod, his eyes sliding to James.
"Nice, Lila. Now James, tell me about your coral reef proposal."
My work vanished, insignificant. James's acceptance to a top marine biology master's program was a triumph. My parents hosted a lavish party, guests filling our cold house, toasting the Morgan name. When I enrolled at a community college for data analytics, I left my acceptance letter on my father's desk. He called me to his study, his voice low with disappointment. "You've let us down, Lila," he said. "This isn't our path." I'd chosen data analytics inspired by a teacher, Ms. Ramsey, who said, "Systems thrive on the people who keep them running, not just the visionaries." I wanted to be that person, ensuring nonprofits ran smoothly, but to my parents, if it wasn't prestigious, it wasn't worth having. The deepest cut came on my 16th birthday. I'd hoped for a quiet dinner, maybe a blueberry pie from a local bakery. But a coastal commission chair invited my parents to a gala that night. They cancelled my birthday without hesitation.
I cried in the kitchen, and my motor found me.
"Lila, don't be selfish," she said, her voice sharp. "One party means nothing compared to James's future connections." I wasn't family, I was a tool for their ambitions. That night reshaped me. At Southern Maine Community College, I threw myself into data analytics, learning to clean datasets and optimize systems under pressure. No one cared about the Morgan name, they cared if I could fix a crashed database. The work was gritty, real, a clean pain compared to years of neglect. My real test came in my early 20s, working as a data analyst for a food bank in Augusta, 60 miles north. It wasn't glamorous, but it was vital. I managed inventory systems, ensuring food reached shelters during blizzards. One winter, a server failure threatened deliveries. I worked 20 hours straight, rebuilding the system. No one praised me publicly, but a volunteer hugged me, saying, "You saved us." That was enough. During my 3 years there, I got one email from my family, from James. "Lila, Dad needs a signed report from a food bank director for a fundraiser. Can you get one?" My reality, sleepless nights, system crashes, was just a prop for their image. I deleted it, cutting the last tie. After Augusta, I didn't return to Kennebunkport. I stayed in Portland, renting a studio near the bay, its air sharp with salt. I started Coastal Data Solutions, a small firm in a leased office smelling of damp wood and coffee. Inspired by a biography of Ada Lovelace, the first programmer, I built a secure system for nonprofits, turning food bank lessons into code. My life was instant noodles, late nights, and the hum of servers, but I was building something mine. The months after leaving Augusta were a blur of code and coffee in my cramped Portland office, a second-floor space above a bakery on Commercial Street. The air carried the warm scent of sourdough and the faint tang of sea salt from Casco Bay, just a block away. My desk, a salvaged pine table, was littered with sticky notes and a dog-eared biography of Ada Lovelace, whose words, "Imagination is the discovering faculty," burned in my mind. I'd read her story during late nights at the food bank, marveling at how she saw patterns where others saw chaos. That was my goal with Coastal Data Solutions, to build a system that turned nonprofit chaos, donation logs, delivery schedules, volunteer rosters, into seamless order. It wasn't glamorous like James's conservation speeches, but it was vital, born from nights when a single database crash could have left families hungry.
I walked alone, my world shrinking to the glow of my monitor and the hum of a content server.
My diet was instant noodles and apples from a corner market, the kind with bruised fruit and a clerk who called me kid. Sleep was a luxury, snatched in 3-hour bursts on a cot in the office's corner. I coded a platform that automated inventory tracking, cutting errors by 15% in early tests. It was gritty work, debugging lines at 2 a.m., cursing syntax errors, testing backups on a server that groaned like an old ship. But each fix felt like a small victory, a brick in a foundation my family couldn't touch. Portland's rhythm kept me grounded, the foghorns at dawn, the clatter of lobster traps on the docks, the chatter of tourists on cobblestone streets. On weekends, I'd walk to the Eastern Promenade, sitting on a bench with a thermos of tea, watching ferries cut through the bay's mist. Those moments were my escape, a reminder that I was building something mine. One gray February morning, my inbox pinged with an email from a Maine co-op in Bath, 35 miles north. They wanted a demo of my system. Hope flickered, sharp and unfamiliar. I packed my laptop, a stack of protein bars, and drove through a sleet-streaked night, my sedan's wipers slapping rhythmically. The co-op's office was a squat brick building, its meeting room plain with folding chairs and a flickering projector. I presented to a dozen skeptical directors, their faces lined from years of budget fights. My slides showed how Coastal Data could streamline their food distribution, saving 20 hours weekly. Most nodded politely, but one woman, Nora Ellis, watched with piercing hazel eyes, a faint scar tracing her temple. She was a former data analyst who'd saved a non-profit system during a 2018 ransomware attack. As I finished, she stood, her voice steady.
Lila Morgan?
You rebuilt Augusta's food bank system in 20. That kept my town fed. She turned to the director. This isn't just code, it's built from crises. Test it. The co-op signed a trial contract, my first real client. That night, Nora and I sat in a Portland pub, its wooden tables scarred with initials, the air thick with the smell of fried clams and stout. Over pints, I told her my story, the ceremony, my father's words, the years of being invisible.
Schellistend, Herr Gase unflinching, no pity, just a Not.
Your family's blind, she said, swirling her glass. They chase headlines, but systems fail without people like you.
You raise the backbone.
Her words hit like a wave, washing away years of doubt. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a Morgan, but as Lila. Nora became a friend, then a mentor, her blunt honesty a guide. We met weekly, dissecting my code, planning pitches. She pushed me to cold email other nonprofits, each message a shot in the dark. A year later, my father called, his voice booming through my phone. Lila, I saw your firm in a community impact report. Impressive. Now, arrange a meeting for James with the Maine Coastal Council. His praise was a transaction, a hook to reel me in.
I gripped my desk, the wood cool under my palms.
Coastal Data's mine, I said, voice steady. It's not your leverage. He paused, then snapped, don't waste this family's efforts. He hung up. Days later, my mother called, her tone syrupy. Lila, darling, we're family. James needs this for his career. I pictured Nora's words, you're the backbone, and said no. Their retaliation was swift. A letter arrived, stating my health insurance, tied to their plan, was cut. It wasn't about money, it was control, a reminder of my vulnerability. But I felt clarity, not fear. I'd built something they couldn't touch. Coastal Data landed a contract with a Bangor charity, doubling our clients. Nora joined as my partner, her expertise sharpening our system. We hired Sam, a 22-year-old coder with a knack for UI design, turning our office into a buzzing hub. Laptops hummed, whiteboards overflowed with flowcharts, and the bakery's scent wafted up. Portland's community embraced us. Local cafes donated coffee, a neighbor dropped off muffins. But then came a state compliance audit, flagged by a Kennebunkport official tied to my father's gala circuit. It wasn't a routine check, it was a surgical strike, digging into every line of code, every contract. Nora's contacts confirmed it. My father had leaned on a friend to trigger it, punishing my defiance. The audit was a war of attrition. We faced endless requests, security logs, financials, even my code's commit history. Nights blurred into days, my eyes burning from screens. Nora and I worked in shifts, Sam brewing coffee at 3 a.m. We submitted thousands of pages, our system flawless from years of paranoid testing. My parents, meanwhile, were drowning. Elise, a financial analyst friend, sent a report, a $3.5 million mortgage on their Kennebunkport house, medical bills from my mother's migraines, failed investments in tidal energy startups. They'd used James's rising star as collateral for loans, betting on his future to prop up their lifestyle. Desperate, they wanted to crush Coastal Data to hide their collapse. I acted quietly, buying their debts through anonymous LLCs, Harbor Holdings for the house, Tide Health for medical bills, Cliff Consulting for my father's contract. Each purchase was a silent strike, my invisible empire growing as they posted photos from Acadia vacations, oblivious to their credit card debts being sold for cents. I was there, collecting every piece. The audit was a crucible, but we emerged unbroken. Coastal Data Solutions' clean report rippled through Maine's nonprofit network, earning us contracts with 3 new clients, a women's shelter in Lewiston, a food pantry in Rockland, and a youth program in Brunswick. Our office, now a sunlit loft overlooking Casco Bay, was alive with purpose. Servers hummed in a corner, their fans a steady drone beneath the chatter of keyboards. Sam, our first hire, sketched user interface mockups on a tablet, his brow furrowed as he tweaked color schemes. Nora, my partner, paced by the windows, pitching our system to a charity director over the phone, her voice sharp and confident. The air carried the scent of salt and coffee, with seagulls crying outside, their calls mingling with the distant clatter of lobster boats. I stood by a whiteboard, scribbling a new database schema, my marker squeaking as I mapped connections. Portland's rhythm, its foghorns at dawn, the creak of docks, the bustle of Old Port's cobblestone streets, grounded me. This was my world, built from scratch, untouchable by the Morgan's shadow. But I knew my family wasn't done. A week before Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed with my mother's number. Her voice, coated in a thin veneer of warmth, felt like a performance.
Lila, darling, come home for dinner. We miss you.
The words were a lie, as obvious as the November chill seeping through my office window. News of our audit victory had spread through Kennebunkport's elite, whispered at galas and board meetings. They didn't miss me, they wanted leverage, a way to pull me back into their orbit. An old version of me might have clung to the hope of reconciliation, picturing a warm holiday table, a family softened by time. But I was no longer that girl. I'd spent months building an invisible empire, buying their debts, owning their world. "I'll be there, Mom," I said, my voice smooth, deliberate. I wasn't going as their daughter, but as their creditor, a strategist stepping onto their battlefield for the final play. The drive to Kennebunkport was quiet, my sedan's tires humming along Route 1, the road flanked by bare maples and glimpses of the Atlantic's grey waves. The Morgans' Victorian house loomed at the end of a manicured lane, its grey shingles gleaming under a cold moon, its wraparound porch lit by lanterns that cast long shadows. Inside, it was a museum of ambition. Polished oak floors, crystal vases, and framed photos of James shaking hands with senators. The dining room smelled of roasted turkey, thyme, and simmering hypocrisy, the walnut table set with heirloom silver and porcelain, a stage for their performance. James, in a navy wool sweater, leaned back in his chair, charming a family friend with tales of his lobster fishery project. My father, at the table's head, carved the turkey with patriarchal precision, his knife glinting under the chandelier. My mother fussed over a bowl of cranberry relish, her smile tight, her eyes darting to me as I sat quietly, my leather satchel at my feet. The meal unfolded with practiced civility, the clink of silverware and murmurs of small talk masking the tension. James recounted his latest grant win, his voice bright, drawing nods from my parents. I ate slowly, tasting nothing, my mind sharp, waiting for their move. It came after dessert, as pumpkin pie sat half-eaten and coffee steamed in delicate cups. My father cleared his throat, setting his fork down with a delicate clink. His smile was magnanimous, condescending, the kind he used on junior colleagues. "Lila," he began, his voice carrying across the table, "your mother and I are so proud of your little firm. It's remarkable, really, what you've done." The praise was hollow, a drumbeat before the ask. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The thing is, we've hit a financial pinch, temporary of course. With your success, we thought you might be able to help out."
Ze erkreckelt, wer Eier on me.
This was the moment I'd planned for, the culmination of months of silent warfare.
I set my fork down, the soft clink echoing like a gunshot in the silence.
Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my satchel and pulled out a slim leather folder, its black surface stark against the white tablecloth. I placed it between the pie and the crystal water goblets, the thud heavy, final. "I know," I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the room.
I met my father's eyes, unblinking. I know everything.
I opened the folder and slid the first document toward him, my fingers steady. "This is the deed transfer for this house. Harbor Holdings LLC, my company, bought the second mortgage 8 months ago. I own this house." His face, flushed with wine and confidence, drained to a sickly gray. His fork clattered to his plate, the sound sharp. My mother's hand froze on her coffee cup, her knuckles whitening. James's smile faltered, his eyes darting between us. I didn't pause. I turned to my mother, sliding another document her way. "Your migraines, Mom?" The medical bills were piling up, sold to collection agencies. Tide Health, another of my firms, bought them all. "I've been paying for your treatment." Her mouth opened in a silent gasp, her composure crumbling, her hand trembling as it hovered over the paper. Finally, I looked back at my father, pushing the last document toward him. "And this is your consulting contract with Cliff Consulting. A generous deal, wouldn't you say? Also my company. Every dollar keeping this family afloat for the last 8 months came from me." The silence that followed was suffocating, a void where their perfect world used to be. My father's face was ashen, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the table's edge. My mother stared at the papers, her breaths shallow, her carefully curated mask shattered.
James, the golden child, broke the silence, his voice a stammering whisper.
"Lila, what are you saying?"
"This can't be true." I stood, my chair scraping the oak floor, the sound raw, powerful.
I was no longer the girl cowering in the corner at Portland's Regency Hotel. I was in command. "You called me a cog, Dad," I said, my voice cold as the November wind outside. "A spare part. But now this cog decides whether you have a roof over your heads tomorrow." I let the words hang, their weight crushing the room's pretense. I didn't come to collect a debt. I came to deliver a truth. You taught me legacy is everything, that bloodline matters most.
You were wrong.
Competence is everything.
Performance is everything.
I turned and walked out, my satchel in hand, the heavy oak door closing behind me with a soft thud. The silence of their shattered world was deafening at my back. The drive back to Portland felt different, the weight of 27 years lifting with each mile. The Atlantic glittered under the moon, its waves a steady pulse, washing away the last of the Morgan's hold. Back in my studio apartment, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Voicemails from my mother, her voice tearful, pleading, "Lila, we're family, don't do this." Texts from James, a torrent of rage, calling me a traitor, a cold-hearted schemer. I didn't answer. The emotional battlefield they'd ruled for years was closed. Instead, I had my lawyer draft a formal email, sent from a generic coastal data address. It outlined the terms. I'd cover the house's mortgage payments and my mother's essential medical needs, nothing more. All non-essential spending, galas, vacations, James's tailored suits, must cease. My father's consulting contract with Cliff Consulting was terminated, effective immediately. The email closed with a single, clear sentence: further communication should be directed to my legal counsel. I wasn't their bank, I was the line keeping their ship from sinking entirely. A week later, Nora and I drove to Cape Elizabeth, 10 miles south, to scout a new office. Coastal Data was outgrowing our loft, and I wanted a space with salt in the air, far from Kennebunkport's stifling legacy. We walked the cliffs near Two Lights State Park, the Atlantic's grey waves crashing below, the wind scouring my skin clean.
"Who are you holding up?"
Nora asked, her scarf fluttering, her eyes fixed on the horizon.
I hooked my jacket tighter, the cold beating my fingers.
"Empty," I said, my voice soft against the surf. "I won, but it feels like cutting off a rotten limb. Painful but necessary." She nodded, her silence a comfort. "That's the victory, Lila," she said. "Not their collapse, but you realizing you don't need their approval." Her words echoed something I'd read in Brené Brown's work on vulnerability, a book I'd found in a Portland bookstore. She wrote about the courage to set boundaries, the pain of letting go.
"This was my reckoning, the hardest thing I did on."
Days later, my mother appeared unannounced at our loft, her coat too thin for the November chill, her face stripped of its Kennebunkport armor. She stood awkwardly on the hardwood floor, her heels clicking.
"Lila, can we start over?"
"As a family." Her eyes were desperate, a look I'd never seen.
I stood here, feeling no anger, only a deep sadness for what would never be.
"No, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "That ship's gone. I'll keep you safe, house, health, but the family you want is over." I closed the loft's door, the latch clicking with finality, not anger but acceptance. Coastal Data thrived in our new Cape Elizabeth office, a glass-fronted space with views of crashing waves. We landed contracts with national nonprofits, our system's efficiency earning praise in industry journals. But a hollowness lingered, a void success couldn't fill. I realized my legacy wasn't in balance sheets or contracts, but in something deeper. I launched the Tidewater Fund, dedicating 10% of our profits to mentor women data analysts starting businesses. Our co-working space, a warm loft with mismatched chairs and endless coffee, buzzed with collaboration. Women like Sarah, a former army coder, and Priya, a single mom with a knack for analytics, built startups under our roof, their laughter filling the air. I found joy in their wins, more than my own. My new family grew: Nora, my steady partner; Sam, our coder with a brotherly grin; and Elias, a fisherman I met on Portland's docks, his hands rough from nets, his eyes kind. He saw my scars, emotional, not physical, and loved me for them. Our dinners were chaotic, joyful: lobster rolls on newspaper-covered tables, cider bottles clinking, stories of failed code and stormy seas, the bay's waves a steady heartbeat. One evening, on my balcony overlooking Casco Bay, the sky painted in purples and oranges, my phone buzzed. My father's number. His voice was frail, trembling.
Lila, I'm sorry. The words, "Anse my Herz désire," landed like driftwood, powerless.
I heard you, I said, ending the